In Russia 70 years later, the power of Marx's fusion of critical analysis and revolutionary practice was to be demonstrated. Here, it seemed, men were no longer the victims of history. They'd seized control of it. From Marx's historicist point of view, old-style religion disappears. The historical process itself becomes the sole redeemer. Nothing beyond history is invoked, and what the individual believes and does is no longer of cosmic importance. Only the objective process counts. This was philosophy for a democratic age, in which people are merged into great classes and groups. Marx's way of thinking is very public and objective. He rejects the view of life that starts from the individual person, and he rejects the traditional religious concerns. Agonizings about individual life and freedom and death mean nothing to him. But someone else, a contemporary of Marx and also a critic of conventional religion, took the extreme opposite point of view.
Any reformation which is not aware that fundamentally every single individual needs to be reformed is an illusion. The individual stands alone. The ethical reality of the individual is the only reality. It is not doctrine which ought to be revised. It is not the church which ought to be reformed and so on. No, it is existences which should be revised. Our whole way of life is stuff and nonsense.
In 18th century Denmark, one of the poorest parishes in the poorest district was Sæding. It couldn't afford a pastor of its own, and the parish house was let to a peasant family. Surnames weren't yet fixed, and they were nicknamed after their address, the churchyard.
Søren Kierkegaard was by far the most gifted of modern Christian thinkers. At the time when Marx was in Paris, he was developing a new approach to philosophy that came to be called existentialism. The chief influence on his life had been his father, who was born here in the wastes of the Jutland Heath back in the 1760s, at a time when Denmark was still feudal and backward.
11-year-old Michael lived very rough, working as a shepherd boy and out in all weathers. 70 years later, his son Søren recalled something that happened at that time.
The dreadful case of a man who, when he was a little boy, suffered much hardship, was hungry, numb with cold. He stood on a hillock and cursed God. And the man was not able to forget this when he was 82 years old.
The young Michael Kierkegaard escaped from peasant life to become eventually a businessman in Copenhagen. He grew rich and retired early, outwardly successful, but guilt-ridden and melancholy. His second wife bore him 7 children, of whom Søren was the last and dearest. But the wife and 5 of the children died, and the old man devoted all his energies to Søren.
As a child, I was seriously and sternly brought up in Christianity. Humanly speaking, it was a crazy upbringing. The depth of my melancholy was only equalled by the depth of my skill in concealing it. My one joy was that nobody could discover how unhappy I felt. I've never had any immediacy, and in the ordinary human sense of the word, I have never lived. I did not gradually learn reflection. I am reflection from first to last.
After the naval defeats inflicted by Nelson, the old feudal and imperial order in Denmark broke down, and the country modernized. It embraced industrialism from England and romanticism from Germany. At this time, Kierkegaard, still a student in Copenhagen, fell in love with Regina Olsen, then still a very young girl. But he saw erotic love, and therefore his own wooing of Regina, in romantic and theatrical terms, as a doomed, insatiable yearning after an unattainable ideal. The theme of the opera he loved most of all, Mozart's Don Giovanni. Erotic passion can be dangerous. Don Giovanni is punished for his excesses by being dragged off to hell. But the theatre is a place of paradoxes and transformations. With the death of his father and his love for Regina, Kierkegaard's view of his own life is about to undergo a dramatic change.
Wednesday, April the 19th. My reserve and self-isolation are broken. I must speak. God give me grace. My whole being is changed. God's love overwhelms me. What he has done for me is indescribable. My father's death really pulled me up. I dared not believe that the fundamental misfortune of my being could be resolved. But now a hope has awakened in my soul that God may desire to resolve the misery of my being. Now I'm in faith in the profoundest sense. Faith is immediacy after reflection. I have understood the highest. That is not given to many in every generation. But almost at the same moment, something new rushes upon me. The highest of all is not to understand the highest, but to act on it.
Kierkegaard loved to walk here in the Grib forest, and finding your way through a forest is an old image for finding your path through life. When you come to a parting of the ways, you pause, reflect, and then strike out along your chosen path. Commitment brings you back into the forward movement of life. Faith is immediacy again after reflection. The trouble was that Kierkegaard himself hadn't yet found his own path in life. At the age of 27, he still had no career. His conversion basically reduced the options to two. One path led to marriage to Regina, a country parsonage, and an honourable but modest happiness. Half his soul longed for just that. Alternatively, perhaps he was required to develop the other side of himself, his strange personality and special gifts, in which case he should remain an outsider and become a writer. an artist, a poet of the spiritual life. The meaning of Kierkegaard's whole life hung on the decision, and he now saw that choice is everything. Perhaps you can understand life backwards, but it has to be lived forwards. So, as Marx was to do later, Kierkegaard set out to reverse the traditional relationship of knowledge and action in Western thought. Reality is a process of becoming, action comes first. But whereas Marx had seen us as cooperating with historical forces, for Kierkegaard, the leading edge of reality itself is nothing but our own personal decisions. The choices we make settle what we become and what kind of world we're going to find ourselves in. So Kierkegaard's new philosophy of existentialism is a philosophy of action and the will. Life's chief task is to become an individual. But Kierkegaard lived in the first age of mass communications, the electric telegraph, the railway, the daily press. And he could see a time coming when most people would be spectators of life rather than actors. The many, the public, would drift and dream and watch the few. But Kierkegaard says no. You can only become an individual by action and decision. Faced with his own need to decide between Regina and that country parsonage, or the difficult life of an exception, an oddity, a writer, Kierkegaard sees that religious belief is not a matter of accepting reassuring information about how things are up there. It's a challenge to commit yourself to a way of life. Faith is an act of pure freedom by which we choose ourselves, choose our path in life.
What is this self of mine? It is the most abstract of all things. And yet, at the same time, it's the most concrete. It's freedom. The consciousness of being an individual, which is fundamental in man, is his consciousness of eternity. Christianity is not a doctrine. It is an existence communication. It can only be expounded by being realized in men's lives.
Kierkegaard made his choice. In a favorite metaphor, he was to become not a domestic goose, but a wild goose flying alone and high. So he neither married nor entered the ministry, but instead became a freelance writer, living off money left him by his father. The starting point for his writing was inevitably himself. He had to understand and explain his own strange personality, his relation with his father, and the reasons why he'd caused such pain and scandal all round by breaking off his engagement to Regina Olsen. Well, his archive is preserved here in the Royal Library in Copenhagen, and the papers alone run to over 40 volumes. We have journals ranging from 1834, when he was 21, right through to his death 21 years later. Kierkegaard had such a highly reflective and dialectical mind. He was so quick-moving that he could call up and explore within himself many different forms of consciousness and ways of life. As he says somewhere, I go fishing for 1,000 monsters in the depths of my own soul.